Well, hello and welcome, people of the internet. My name is Ganyonz, and today I want to give you my initial impressions of Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. The folks over at Awaken Realms were kind enough to reach out a week ahead of release and provide me with a Steam key so that I could check out the 1.0 release a bit ahead of schedule and create any content I wanted in anticipation of the full release, which is exactly the video you're seeing here today. That being said, as a matter of full disclosure, all thoughts and opinions are of my own. Awaken Realms and or Questline have not influenced this in any way, and thank you so much to the team for providing that key. Now, what is Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon? Tainted Grail is a first-person open-world sandbox RPG set in a dark reimagination of Arthurian legend. Set 600 years after Arthur's death, this undead mystical force, the weirdness, and a deadly plague called the Red Death are creeping their way back onto the island, and there may just be a way to stop it with the help of some old friends. For context, I played for about 4 hours into the main story, which I felt was enough time to give reasonable first impressions, while also not playing too much since I did plan on streaming this right here on YouTube. Now, I want to get this out of the way right off the rip, and then we'll get back around to it at the end of my thoughts, but there are going to be a lot of similarities and parallels that can be made between this game and the Elder Scrolls series. So for better or for worse, if you like that series, or if you don't, whether you like Tainted Grail or not will likely not fall too far from your opinion on that series. But without further ado, let's talk about this game. So let's just rip the band-aid off and talk about probably one of the most important aspects of the game, the combat. I thought it was fine. I felt like my hits lacked impacts at times, like my sword was just kind of floating through enemies. Blocking felt a little weird. You don't really hold your shield up fully. It's almost like you're only holding it up 10% higher, and I didn't really feel like the impact or get audio feedback that the hit was blocked. So it was a bit hard to tell without taking my eyes off the enemy and actually looking down at my health bar if I took a hit or not, which is also the case with the parry system, which this game does have. Although this is probably the aspect of the game that I most had issue with. The game provides you with a tutorial on parrying and even includes a video clip of what a parry looks like, something that I very much appreciate. However, in that clip, the enemy clearly gets staggered every time he gets parried. I tried to work this parry system for probably a good 15 or 20 minutes before I properly got a grasp of why it didn't feel great to me. I never actually saw a staggered effect. The only real feedback you get from a successful parry is that your enemy's stamina bar drops a bit. And once they have no stamina remaining, they do enter a stun phase where they can't take any actions, but because of the preconceived notion I had built in my head of what a parry should look like based on the tutorial video in the tutorial menu, I kept thinking that my parry just wasn't going off, and so since I never really saw the benefit of creating an opening to attack after a parry, it didn't really make sense to ever use it. Instead, I just kind of held block to reduce any incoming damage and kind of hoped that that was enough. But again, it was kind of hard to tell when the block was actually happening, just because it's hard to tell when shield was actually raised. Combat, though, is definitely stamina focused. Obviously, with a parry system, that assumption should kind of be baked in, but you'll use up quite a bit of stamina when attacking, blocking, running, jumping, or even dashing, which does add a nice touch so you don't have to like mindlessly bash enemies to death. You can kind of move around, dodge incoming attacks. This does get a bit tricky when fighting multiple enemies though, since they'll have double, triple, quadruple, and so on and so on, the stamina you have, and you run out much faster than they do, which will put you in a winded phase for a moment, opening you up for incoming attacks. So it is kind of best to stick to one-on-one fights when you can. I have one more thing to touch on in relation to this, but I'll come back to that at the end. I'll also say real quickly that hitboxes feel really good. In fact, they might even be too good, which sounds funny, but there were times where I thought I should have hit an enemy based on how I feel like this combat should feel, but looking back at the footage, I just barely missed the enemy model, which is nice. You do actually have to aim, but can cause you to miss sometimes due to animations kind of switching directions following the momentum of the weapon. And so you kind of have to learn the attack patterns of your own weapon so you know where the next attack is going to land and better aim. The last thing I'll mention when it comes to combat is the soul fragment mechanic, which you get in the first area of the game. It's basically your ultimate. It's quite powerful and will be pretty necessary for some harder fights. Again, I'll kind of touch on that later, but I haven't interacted with the mechanic a ton. It does seem like you'll be able to swap this around to be the ultimate you want to play with, however. The leveling system felt really great. This is definitely a leveling system you'll be familiar with if you've played other RPGs in a similar vein. By using your skills, one-handed weapons, ranged weapons, sneaking around, mixing potions, you'll level up each individual skill, which will slightly improve your performance in each specified area. Once you get enough of these individual skill levels, you'll be able to level up your overall stats and also put points into skill trees for each corresponding stat. What stats you decide to put points into will be really important. Not just for how effective you are in combat, but it seems like the direction you want to go for your build will be pretty locked in based on what you decide to spec into. So, for example, a short sword might require 3 strength points to equip, while a short bow requires 3 in dexterity. And keep in mind, you only get 1 point per level. I came across a pair of pants that needed 4 dex and 4 perception in one of the first bandit areas, and there was just no way I could afford 8 levels to equip those when I was building into strength for my one-handed sword build. I don't know if there's any way to respec these points later in the game, so just keep that in mind when you start playing and planning what you want to play as. The skill trees, they're quite nice. They're actually a pretty perfect size, I think. Each attribute has a set of skill trees tied to it, and as you build them out, will give you further features into each mechanic as you level it up. You can also put extra points into nodes you've already picked up to further enhance their overall performance. These points, though, unlike your base stats, can be reset right in the menu. So here, it seems like you'll be able to experiment. Perhaps you find you don't like one-handed combat and want to swap to two-handed combat specialization. It seems like you kind of have the freedom to experiment within the overall attribute pathway that you've selected through your stats. I like this system a lot. You can actually also put additional points into each node to kind of power it up if you have a certain effect that you want to make stronger. Overall, it's clean, easy to read, easy to understand, and does the job well. Overall, the UI is very clean, easy to read. I never had a problem finding anything I needed or navigating menus, which there aren't really that many of anyway. I did encounter a few hiccups or oddities through how the menu system works with gameplay though. For example, you'll have access to 3 quick slots that can be used for potions or food. You can swap between these freely when wandering around, but let's just say I have a potion that I only want to use once in a while or in a niche circumstance. I can't actually go into my inventory, select that potion, and use it from the menu. I'd have to put it into one of my quick slots and use it in-game. There is an autofill slot that you can kind of queue up whatever you want the next consumable to be after the first one runs out, but there were a few times I just wanted to eat one specific piece of food and not manage an additional quick access slot. I also couldn't get the right menu to pop up. I kept wanting my tab button to open the equipment menu, but even after rebinding it, it still kept opening up the last menu option that I was on, whether that was the character menu, the map, so on, so forth. Also, another small hang-up or oddity I ran into was related to what I'm going to refer to as the survival aspects of the game. So you'll be able to mine, cut down trees, dig up treasure, and other things around the map. I think there's even a book that you can buy early on that allow you to like sketch. I didn't try it, but all these actions will require a necessary tool. So pickaxe, woodcutting axe, shovel, for example. I'm personally a bit of a loot goblin, so any chance I get, if it can be picked up, I'm picking it up. But, and here's the hang up, so you're going to have access to 4 weapon loadouts, and each tool you want to quick swap to is going to cost you one of those loadouts. It feels a bit like Pokemon back when HMs were a thing and you had to dedicate one of your mons to have strength, surf, cut, and rock smash or flash or whatever, so that you didn't have to backtrack and then that mon just took up one of your 6 slots. I really wish that if you just had the item in your inventory, the game would allow you to use it rather than taking up a loadout slot. This probably won't be a problem if you're just doing a bow run or a sword run, for example, something where you just need one loadout, but I can see this becoming an issue for magic users since it seems like the loadout system is the only way to kind of hot swap spells on the fly. Some other things that I liked a lot, you'll occasionally find some monsters or bosses that are just way too high level for you that you'll have to come back later and fight. I personally got absolutely rocked by this knight just hanging out, and he asked if I wanted him to kill me, and he very much obliged. You don't have to spend time opening chests, barrels, crates, or accessing corpses. You just walk up and you view the inventories and either scroll through the options or take all. It's a quick time saver, but one nonetheless. Pretty much everything you can pick up has some kind of use. There's been a lot less clutter that I've noticed. You know, there's no like forks, knives, like there's a lot less of that compared to other games. Some dialogue options will also have skill checks, it seems, kind of like a Baldur's Gate or D&D system. The ones I've run into so far were hidden behind like question marks, probably to imply that it's a high check to pass, but presumably there will be new dialogue options for you, which can lead to some new outcomes depending on your build, which is pretty nice. I like when stats not only define how combat plays out, but also like how your character personality, if you want to lead into that. A lot of ingredients or even books that can provide you with recipes that you can use later on for cooking, alchemy, or smithing, which are the 3 crafting systems of the game, at least that I've experienced so far. 2 of these I feel like are done really well. The third, I might be missing something. It just felt off. Ultimately, the systems are all basically the same. When you go to craft, you'll need a couple of ingredients. Some ingredients will improve the overall outcome of what you get. So you get like a +1, +2 version of whatever potion or food. Others will increase or decrease the chance of the resulting craft, either getting a small boost or drop in performance. And you can choose which ingredients you want to use more of to get the desired effect. You'll often find recipes around the world, which will of course unlock better things you can make. Blacksmithing has a few different systems where you can either craft new gear, enhance what you already have, add runes to weapons, which I didn't get to play around with, or even reduce the weight of some of your equipment. Hey, heavy armor boys. Alchemy, though, is where I think I might be missing something. So you select the recipe you want to make, and the menu will auto-load the ingredients you need to make the potion. But there can be multiple combinations of items that can make a single recipe. The game doesn't let you decide what you're going to use to make that potion. It'll just auto-load the next ingredient once you run out of the first. This just felt kind of weird to me, since you had full control over what you wanted to cook with or smith with, so this just felt kind of out of place from the other 2 crafting systems. I didn't play enough to get to a point where I knew what kind of all the recipes were that I had available, so I don't actually know, for example, if like a health potion and a mana potion would have overlapping ingredients. Let's say there was 1 out of the 3 that kind of shared, right? Potentially you'd want to save that one for maybe you just want to make health potions, but if you're making mana potions, it's using one of the ones that you need, and you could be using this one instead. I didn't really have a way to change that. Maybe I missed something, but if I didn't, that was kind of a weird oddity for that system. The alchemy system alone, blacksmithing and cooking, though, felt really nice. Now, I mentioned I had saved something for last. This isn't a spoiler by any means, but it does involve a certain quest and a boss towards the beginning of the game. So if you want to go in completely blind without talking about any boss mechanics, skip to this time code on the screen. Otherwise, let's proceed. So, the second real boss that you encounter along the main storyline is this necromancer. And the reason I bring this up is because I'm a little bit weary when it comes to boss fights, how this game is going to handle them. So the necromancer, what does he do? Well, he summons skeletons to fight with him, 2 to be precise. I started just trying to wail on the necromancer, but as we talked about before, stamina is pretty tough to manage, especially when fighting multiple enemies at the same time, which of course in this case 3. So since that didn't work, I tried to lure the skeletons away. Take them on without the necromancer. Maybe there's a cooldown on how often he can actually summon them. Well, as soon as you kill one skeleton, he summons another. So you'll just end up fighting endless waves of skeletons. Oh, plus he casts fireballs at you. So what was my solution? Use the soul fragment, slow down time, use all my stamina, slicing him up until I was out of stamina, and then hope that I could barrage him with enough damage to kill him before the skeletons killed me. And that ended up working. It wasn't the cleanest, but it worked. My hang-up is that this boss, and technically the first boss you fight as well, which is even the tutorial for this power, essentially came down to just kind of using this ability. I was kind of hoping that this fight, for example, that I was onto something, luring his minions away, killing them, then having a window to fight the necromancer one-on-one before he summoned more minions, but in the end, it was kind of just a clobberfest using one ultimate ability. And while I actually had quite a bit of fun with the combat during my 4 hours, this boss was kind of the amalgamation of all the worst aspects in combat that I found throughout my playthrough. So I do hope that bosses down the line aren't just going to be kind of ultimate spam training dummies, and that there might be some mechanics that you have to play through. Although I know that's not kind of normal or typical for this kind of RPG, but that was just my experience with bosses so far. So I guess the ultimate hang up here, and except for that first mention at the top, I went the whole video without comparing the two, but I don't think anyone is realistically going to be looking at Tainted Grail and not also looking at buying Oblivion Remastered. Unfortunately, the whole Shadow Drop thing probably took Questline by surprise and is unfortunate since the two games have so much in common, including price point. And for people who have a tight gaming budget, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a big question for a lot of people, but from my perspective, I never played Oblivion proper. Remastered is my first experience with the game, and I have about 8 hours into that one. There are things I prefer about Tainted Grail, sure, and things I prefer about Oblivion. I like the leveling system of Tainted Grail a lot more. It reminds me a bit of how Skyrim did its leveling system. Oblivion to me is more about flexibility and being able to swap on the fly and not being restricted by what stats you choose on leveling up and allowing a free-flowing sandbox. But the level ups feel a bit lackluster, only really having major upgrades every 25 levels. I prefer the combat of Oblivion though. It does feel a little bit weightier, it's easier to tell when a weapon impacts with a shield or my character. There's also a lot more flexibility when it comes to spellcasting and hot swapping, definitely. And of course, builds in general, since you aren't locked in by stat decisions. Exploration is pretty equivalent, and of course the overall theme is kind of similar, with the darker edge definitely going to Tainted Grail. I didn't really get into it too much, but I didn't really know what kind of tone this game was going to have. I didn't play any of the early access, and so I kind of assumed it was going to be something darker, but something similar to Elder Scrolls. But during one of like the opening cutscenes, this almost felt more like a grimdark game. It almost gave me that like Diablo feeling to it, and it was one of the opening like first trailers that was released, and just like completely changed the tone of the game. And I also didn't really get much into it, but there's certainly some jank, shall we say, with Tainted Grail, which I don't think anyone is really going to be surprised about. Can also be found in Oblivion Remastered. It's funny, throughout my first 4 hours, I couldn't help but think that this kind of felt like an Elder Scrolls 4.5, kind of in the middle of Skyrim and Oblivion Remastered. So overall, so far, I think Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon is going to be a pretty fun time. It definitely has flaws, don't get me wrong, but if you're looking for an open world sandbox RPG experience with a lot of build potential, a lot of loot to grab, and some potentially really challenging fights, I think you're going to have a good time. But yep, that's pretty much what I got from my first impressions of Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon, and that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all again in the next one.